Thanks, Alex. Great to be here. Sorry, should I call you Professor G or Doc?
Please call me Alex.
You sure?
Yeah, of course.
Good. And you can call me Stu or Stuart or anything you like. Anyway, glad to be here and grateful for that introduction, and looking forward to a good, candid conversation. These are always a ton of fun.
Yeah, no, that was a thorough introduction. Thank you very much, Darlene. And it is such an honor to be interviewing you, Stu, not just because you've created a company that is a unicorn, but because you've endeavored to do so, I think with really distinct principles and approaches that I'd like to discuss in greater depth. And I think it was awesome in our, we had an introductory talk before this where you kind of laid out your expectations for our chat today. And I wanted to highlight that they were to keep it real. And I'd like to invite everybody out there who's listening in and chatting to brainstorm some comments, because it's clear that Stu wants to have a conversation here, a dialogue, because we just don't want to preach to the choir, but we also want to be able to learn and grow and develop in our understanding of how to merge together corporate profitability and environmental sustainability. So to start us off, if it's okay, Stu, I'd like to just kind of take a step back and talk a little bit more about your journey, because I think your background and your journey is such an important part of where Grove is today. So how did it get started? How did you, for example, acquire your just first 100 customers and then your next 100?
Sure. So so I will, in the spirit of this, I know this is recorded, but I'm also gonna keep it as real as I can keep it. If I'm not a little uncomfortable and you're not a little uncomfortable, we probably aren't really talking about the stuff that actually matters. So I will share both sort of why I started it and how it actually got started in practice, which are two distinct things. So I come from a family that's always cared deeply about sustainability. My dad dropped out of college and protested the Vietnam War. Like we were using brown toilet paper my whole childhood, and I didn't even realize there was like sort of another way. So it was an upbringing where sustainability was always front and center. But then started my professional career in and around mostly a big private equity firm called TPG Capital, where I did a fair amount of investing and covered consumer retail and internet. And in that role, got to see firsthand that actually the vast majority of Americans do prefer conscientious product. Something like 74% prefer conscientious product. But in most categories, the conscientious brands had less than 5% market share. And so at the same time, I was also covering consumer internet and seeing all of these companies exploding by making it easy to match consumers with the products they were genuinely looking for. So I started the business with a relatively simple idea of, hey, can we build a direct consumer business that drives better penetration of sustainably formatted products in the home and personal care space, right? This is a space where you can have a product that is better for the environment, works just as well, doesn't cost anymore. And that was even before we made the Grove product, which is sort of like better for the environment, works better, is a better customer experience, and often costs less. You can see I'm proud of the products we made. But in the early days, so I started this company in 2012. I was, I think, 26 years old, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I worked in finance for about 5 years, and turns out if you've worked in finance for about 5 years, that's the peak of like how much you think you know about the world. I think, my confidence level in myself has gone down every day since then. And so I started the business sort of saying, how hard could it possibly be to build a consumer internet company? And turned out it was really hard. It took us a year plus to get the website launched. But the way we acquired our first 100 or 200 customers was really, I think, unusual, at least in my experience. I'm not technical, can't like build a website, can't write a line of code, but I had a very good friend who was a technical product manager. He shared with me that the approach to building great web products is really about doing a bunch of consumer research and understanding what consumers wanted and what consumers were willing to pay for. So for the first 2 or 3 years, truly, we would mock things up in PowerPoint and have like people on this press call are probably, oh my gosh, I hope people still use PowerPoint. But in PowerPoint, you can link like one slide to another. You can click X button to go to slide 49, click Y button, go to slide 48, make it sort of jump around. And I built this PowerPoint wireframe that sort of behaved like a website. And I would go into Starbucks and I would give people a $5 gift card. Nowadays, you probably have to make 10, but give them a gift card enough for one drink. And I would sit with them while they clicked through it. And then at the end, I was like, well, do you want to buy this thing? And, one at a time, we acquired our first truly, I think, 100 customers through not a website, right? Just like a PowerPoint prototype. And I would punch their credit card number into the little Square app on my phone. Square was just a tiny startup back then. And we would charge their credit card. And then I kept in a, Google, in a Excel spreadsheet, all the customers and what they were ordering and all of the math about what they were supposed to get in the future. But the company really got started. It was me and one or two other guys just going to Starbucks, hitting up our friends and family, our friends' families, our family's friends, getting everybody to take half an hour to 40 minutes to click through the product experience with us, and learning from what they did. And the version of the website that exists today that has generated, gosh, it's got to be coming up on $1 billion of aggregate revenue. It's incredible. Is actually not that different than the thing that we used in Starbucks all that time ago. It's kind of amazing. So that was a totally kind of a backwater way to get the company going. And we were really unsuccessful for the first 4 years. It took us 4 years to raise institutional capital. We were fits and starts a bunch of times where I had to cut a check into the company to make payroll. It was an ugly 4 years. But once you're 4 years into a project, this is a little bit of a stupid way to put it, but if you start a company and you quit after 2 years, there's nothing wrong with that, right? You started a company, it didn't work, you quit. A lot of people start companies, they don't work. If you start a company and you do it for 4 years and it doesn't work, that's not you started a company and it didn't work. That's bad judgment, right? So at year 4, it had to work. And yeah, so it's you grinded and eventually got to the point where we're able to get some scale and sort of get the ball spinning a little faster. I'm not sure how much detail you want me to go into on that part of the story, but that was really how we got started. It was my spare bedroom, and we would just go into Starbucks with my crappy ass old Lenovo computer that I stole from my last finance job, and tried to get people to click through this prototype and give a random guy their credit card number.
No, I think that's awesome. I couldn't have had a better explanation of a minimum viable product for my students. So
really recommend the book, The Lean Startup. It sort of went out of fashion in the last decade, but it was really influential for me when I first started. I'm forgetting the author, but it's a really great book.
Awesome. So, great insight into how you started the company. Once it began to operate and generate, revenue and grew to a greater level of complexity, what was your guiding star in how you operated the company once it began to grow beyond just your influence?
Yeah, so the company has a couple of chapters. By the way, Eric Rice is the author of that book, Lean Startup. So the company has a couple of chapters. There's the first chapter, which you could call the sort of finding product market fit chapter. You could call it the looking for the light switch. You could call it the incompetence chapter, whatever you want to call it, right? There's 2012 to 2016 where we were unable to make any meaningful progress. Then there's 2016 to 2020, which is the tiger by the tail phase, right? We grew from 6 million to 350 million in 4 years. That was man, touch it, it turns to gold. It was incredible. And now we're in a different phase, which is sort of okay, we've got this asset. The dynamics in our industry are a little bit different. How do we make sure that we maintain our market leadership with a different level of maturity and different expectations around growth? So there's really been 3 phases of the company. And the biggest transition happened between phase 1 and phase 2, right? The incompetence phase and the sort of tiger by the tail phase, right? This is the moment where all of the magic actually happened, right? Where you go from, for that first 4 years, I think our total staff was 15 people. We were shipping packages from, this is true. We went to a mini storage in the Dog Patch, which is kind of a shady area of San Francisco. It's gotten a little more up and coming now, but back then it was you did not walk outside of the fenced in mini storage. And we had an 800 square foot mini storage unit that we used as our first warehouse. And at the end of the day, if there were more than 20 orders, me and everyone would have to drive out to the Dog Patch, pack the boxes ourselves. How do we get from that to hundreds of thousands of square feet of fulfillment center space spread across the country, doing it the real way? And there were sort of two things that happened in there. And I think this goes to how we ran the, I mean, your question is about how you ran the company, but I'm interpreting it as how do you like run the company to optimize for that, making sure you get that moment and then actually scale your values through that. So the first thing is to get to that moment took an incredible amount of perseverance, right? Those first 4 years were awful. Like I had gone from making a, way overpaid as a private equity person and then a hedge fund person for a couple of years to making 30 grand a year. My wife, bless her soul, met me and was like, I was, into year 1 or something of this startup. And she was like, this is not going to work. And this guy is never going to be able to support our family. But, she was like, that's fine. I'll work. We'll be okay. And, for 3 years, she was totally right. But the fact that we were really clear about our mission and about our why allowed us to attract people who were bought in for more than the money, right? And that's really important because if you're bought in for the money, like if you're a recruiting team, right? And the team is there because they're like, oh, cool. Like I've got the best pen company in the world. And this like connected pen, I'm going to sell 1 billion of them. And like, we're going to make all this money. If the connected pen launch doesn't go well, you're like, well, guess I'm not going to make this money. I'm going to go on to the next startup that makes money. But if your goal is to create real systemic change in an industry, it creates a durability against business volatility, right? Because even as the business, sales can be good 1 month, bad the next month, you can still be really true to your mission and still really feel like you're achieving your goal month after month after month. And one of the things that's true in our company, we've had great periods and terrible periods. In every period, we've gotten better at sustainability, right? In every period, we've gotten better at our mission. And that creates a real durability of culture, a real durability of purpose. And I think, allowed me to run the company in a way that, got us enough shots on goal that eventually one hit. And, it took us 175 investor meetings to get one person to say yes for our first sort of institutional capital, which was terrible. But, if you quit after the 174th, it wouldn't have worked, right? And no one on the team quit during that time. 175 meetings. Fucking sucks. Excuse my language. Am I allowed to use profanity in this?
You totally are.
Okay, great. Yeah.
My students are very used to that. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, it's fucking terrible. Like 174 no's over like a 4-month period. I mean, it was just like one of these guys like was the board member at my wife's company. He was just like literally said to me, this is one of the worst ideas I've ever heard in venture capital. And I was like, thanks, man. Awesome. Great meeting. And I had to go home and tell my wife that, like, because I'd been like, I'm meeting one of your board members. It's really exciting. And I had to go to my wife and tell her how that meeting went. So it was awful. But, turns out 175 no's and 1 yes is like a successful process. So I think we always ran the company from a clear set of principles, and that allowed us to navigate an extraordinary amount of volatility. And as we grew really quickly from sort of like, 15 people to whatever, 1,000 in 4 years, the thing that allowed us to grow really quickly is there was a very well understood sort of social code, if you will, of who you hire, how you make hiring decisions, which is that, we hire people who work hard, are super collaborative, right? The second word in our name is collaborative. If you're like a, I want to go far, go alone, or go fast, go alone type person, like you're not gonna fit in here. And that everybody should understand that mission really matters. And as a result, we built an organization, if it's a software engineer or if it's somebody working on the sort of chemistry side of the business, everybody understands that their work is connected to a broader picture. And that created a really strong fabric of, I don't want to say communication, I'll say like shared language that allowed us to work through all of the problems of scaling really quickly. And so, I've continued to run the business, or at least try to. And by the way, when I say, try to, I mean, I get it wrong, it's 80% of the time, but at least tried to run the business in a way where we're clear-eyed about the fact that, we need to make money. Like we've raised $500 million of other people's money. Like we have an obligation to those investors to go get them their money back and more, or perhaps they won't invest in the next sustainable company. But also we are going to run this business in a way where, when we go to sleep at night, we know that we left the world a little better than we found it. And like when we're grinding, and I'm like grinding some investor for more capital on better terms, I'm doing that because if I am successful, I am advancing the mission that I care about, right? And that to me, having spent a bunch of my time like doing that to make rich people richer as like an investor, or like, okay, cool, you know, a pension fund, no offense to those in academia, and pension funds are great, like, you know, always excited to make an endowment more money. But if like TPG generated a 22% return for the endowment because they got X deal done, you know, if it wasn't TPG that generated the 22%, it'd be like KKR. Who cares, right? You're not really driving change. And so we've always run the business with an understanding that we have an obligation to our shareholders to return capital. And that, you know, that's our heart or our lungs. Like, and we have an obligation to leave the world better than we found it. And that's our heart. And like, you can't live without either, right? It's like, I often use this analogy internally. Like, what's more important, your heart, your brain, or your lungs? Well, you can't live without any of them. So why even debate it, right? You need all. And that's how we've tried to build a culture that can support both an authentic commitment to the mission and also an understanding that we're a for-profit business. And our ability to scale so quickly has been due in large part because of our ability to make credible promises that I hopefully will make good on to a bunch of our investors, that if you bet on us today, we will return you more capital downstream. Our investors are not, for the most part, you know, they don't care about the mission, right? The guy who said yes after 175 no's, fucking Trump voter who drives a pickup truck. Like, you know, would I have guessed that's my guy? And we're great friends. Don't hold it against him. Like, you know, I would never have guessed that's my guy. But, you know, it only takes one. And for what it's worth, that guy's name is Paul Martino. We're great friends, and he's been an amazing business partner to me for the last 6 years.
Amazing. You answered several of the questions that I had coming up. And I think what I'm really interested in from what you just said is that grinding, you know, and you've illustrated the interconnection between corporate profitability and environmental responsibility. But how did you remind yourself of that? Like on a day-to-day like basis, when the stress was high and when the ambiguity was high and when there was disagreement in teams, like what were the touchstones? What were the really clear you know, shorthands that you used to be able to make that the guiding influence on the company? Because it could easily gone 100 different ways among that level of
Alex, you're talking about it like it's in the past tense, man. The fight is on today and every day. It's amazing. I don't feel any more secure in this job than I did, you know, when I first started. But the thing that my book will be called, if I ever write one, is The Only Way Out is Through. And that is the mentality that I have always had, right? Which is there is no quit. There is no stopping, right? Like I am in a tunnel in the middle of the mountain. I am going to get through it, right? I'm not going around. There's one way out. And that is through. And, you know, that mentality is, I think, incredibly valuable, because as soon as and look, I'm not the strongest person mentally, but as soon as I let the idea creep in for 1 second that I could quit, oh my God, it's not enticing. Like, I'm working so hard. I could go get a corporate job, probably make a little more money, you know, spend more time with my family, whatever. Like, oh, not have all this, you know, back then it was like not have all the stress about, you know, making payroll. Now it's like not have my board constantly grinding and whatever. Like, you know, there's always some, and I should say my board is great, right? It's not like my board in particular. It's just, you know, it's their job to hold the CEO accountable. As soon as quitting becomes an option, you start to say, oh, what if, right? As long as I can keep my frame of mind as these are the circumstances, we're going to just make the best of them every day. There is no other option. Why even like be sad about like the circumstances? You just got to grind for it. I think that's probably number one. And number two is, and that a little bit answers Olivia's question in the chat. Thank you for putting stuff in the chat, by the way. And thank you, David. I would not have invested in me, but a bunch of smart people, well, a lot of them said no, a lot of them said yes too. But I think the other thing is I built a business where business success and mission success were completely the same, right? It was never like, not even like the Tom's model of 1 for 1 of like, oh, well, like the bigger we get, like more we'll give back. I mean, that would be nice. But for me, the change that I sought was really, how do I transform this category that's in every home in the world, pretty much? That is a terrible track record on human health and an even worse track record on environmental health. How do I transform that category, right? And every bit of success we have, every bit of capital I raise, every customer I acquire, all of that goes to further that mission that I really care about. And so I don't have to think, oh, I don't want to jeopardize my professional career. It's the same thing, right? Like my commitment to the mission, my professional career, same thing, right? And so I can drive as hard as I can to maximize shareholder value. And by doing that, I will also maximize mission success.
So what does that say about the relationship, the underlying relationship of corporate profitability and environmental sustainability? If we were to extrapolate from your example, and we have a lot of students in the audience right now, what is the generalizable lesson from your experience?
Yeah, so this is a question that you asked me in one of our prior conversations, as though, because I do think one of the biggest and worst fallacies in sort of corporate thinking is that sustainability is a cost center, or in some way people who are like sustainability driven, mission driven are not also like 100% cutthroat play to win capitalists, right? Because I'm unashamed of it. I am a like absolute play to win capitalist. I'm like principled. I'm a little bit of a communist and think that the top 1% owns way too much of the world. And like, totally that's true. But also I recognize the capitalist system. I'm wildly competitive and I like play to win. And given that lens, I think that our commitment to the mission is a durable competitive advantage. When I look at the innovation we've been able to bring to market, I think we've been able to bring it to market because our team genuinely hears the call to change the category and genuinely like wants to do breakthrough stuff to make it happen. And they know they're not going to go to their boss and their boss is going to be like, why did you work on, X thing that may not sell instead of reducing the cost of our existing format by 3%? Right? Nobody ever has that question. So that is one example of how I think an authentic commitment to an important mission drives durable competitive advantage, right? Like one example of probably our best known product is we have these reusable glass spray bottles and zero waste concentrates. We were the first to do this. There've been like 10 companies that have launched to copy us now. We've been in this market for so long. A number of companies have launched to copy us and then gone out of business, right? We're like in the part of the phase where the copycats have launched and failed. Some of them are still doing around and doing okay. Anyway, but this type of like real innovation only comes because people genuinely are willing to take risk. And they're genuinely willing to take risk because they're not like, what can I do to collect rent and move up one level in my career? No, they're coming to work saying, how can I get the plastic out of this category, period? And yeah, so I don't know. I'm a huge believer that mission is a durable competitive advantage. It changes who the people are who work with it. You will work with your company. It changes how committed they will be. It changes how much you'll enjoy your job. And for what it's worth, employees are smart and they can see through a bullshit mission statement. And when Facebook's mission is connect the world, right? There's a reason Facebook has to pay people who work at Grove 3 times as much for the same job, right? Because like people know that you go to work there, you're like actively destroying the world, and you go to work at Grove, you're actually making it better, right? And there's a cost benefit for a lot of people in that. But I do think a real mission, and we're not unique in this. Like it's hard to get a job at Patagonia, really hard. Because that's awesome, right? You get to work in a really good corporate job, work on awesome products and know you're making the world a better place. It's a great trade-off.
Yeah. And I think your point about marketing also spoke to Paloma's comment in the chat as well. But it sounds, it doesn't sound easy, but it sounds relatively straightforward. And I know that it's not. So I think one of the areas that can get rocky for a lot of companies is when they're going down this path, choosing to become a benefit corporation and get certified by B Corp in particular. So can you tell us a little bit about that certification process and not just the ups and the benefits, but also some of the rockier parts of the pathway?
Yeah. So I think the B Corp thing is just a no-brainer. Like, do it. Like, there's no downside. Do it. It doesn't take that long. You can have like a mid-level person, I mean, we had a guy 2 years out of college who's pretty competent, pulled everything together for us, like got it done. We accidentally disclosed everyone's salary to him during the process. It turned out to not be a big deal. Like, we all moved on with our lives, and it was great. So I highly recommend it. As a company of our size now, like 1,000+ employees, it's a more involved process because you've got to be like, okay, well, how many of those is just like a lot of math to do on that many employees? It's much easier when all of your employees fit in a spreadsheet, but do it when all of your employees fit in a tiny little Excel spreadsheet, because it's much easier to keep it up, right? You've built that habit. So it's a no-brainer. There's been a bunch of brain damage around it from time to time, because it is real work to keep it up. But honestly, like, if you're not running your business in a way that would get you a good score, then what's the point? Like, at the end of the day, it'd be surprising to me if most people were like, oh man, I saved a company an extra couple $100,000, but the people that I work with, I screwed them over by giving them shitty benefits. Like, who's going to feel good about that trade at the end of the day? And yeah, so I don't know. I think it's a no-brainer. And it actually, for me, created a bunch of better practices around transparency and employee ownership and things that I hadn't thought through nearly as deeply as the folks at B Labs had thought through it. So I was totally in favor of it. I think it's a no-brainer. We're actually not just a certified B Corp. We're also a public benefit corporation instead of a C Corp. So we have a fiduciary obligation to our shareholders, but we also have the same obligation to consider communities, our employees, and the environment in every decision, right? So if I wanted to like buy all my power through wind power or move my plastic packaging on the dishwasher tabs to aluminum, which we're doing, even though it's going to hurt our profit, no one can say to me, hey, Stu, why did you make that sustainability first move? I can say, hey, it's my job to not just consider shareholder returns, but also consider the impact of our business on the environment.
And then what's not been so helpful about being a B Lab certified company?
Oh, I see. Got it. We talked about this a little bit before. Yeah, I will say, so the double-edged sword on this, and this is a little bit of the double-edged sword on being a mission-driven company, is I have to do a lot of explaining about, your brain, your heart, your lungs, which is more important when it comes to, sustainability, profitability, and sort of like whatever employee well-being. If you think about it, right, as like a mission-driven company, why are you firing someone instead of just doing a lot of coaching? You're sort of like an integrity thing, right? People get fired for performance issues at growth, right? It happens. If it didn't happen, we wouldn't be a successful organization, right? Performance management is a super important part of being a healthy organization, right? It's good for the employees too. You don't want an employee, it's not good for any employee to sit in a job where they're not succeeding, right? Lots of great people who just don't have the right role at Grove, for whatever reason, need a fresh start, it's fine, right? That's a part of normal career pathing. But it doesn't feel like a mission-driven thing to do when you see someone you really care about get let go. If costs go up in the supply chain, which they have a lot this year, and you want to pass some of that cost through to your customers, how is raising prices consistent with our values of trying to change the category, right? We're going to make it accessible to fewer people. Consumers are dealing with inflation. Are we going to make it harder for them to access our product at a time when our customers are dealing with higher gas prices, higher prices for food, all that? And yeah, we are. Because otherwise we're not going to sustain as a business, right? And so it's really hard to make sure we're doing a sufficient amount of education so that everyone in our employee base realizes that actually a part of being a successful mission-driven business is being willing to both be a business and be mission-driven at the same time, right? And that, it's a tax. It's a maybe a tax is the wrong word. It's a real responsibility for us as an organization to make sure that people understand that doing things that are good for the business, cutting costs, reduce our customer service levels, like stuff like that. Is that good for the customers? Good for our mission? Okay. But ultimately we need to serve all three sort of stakeholders in order to be successful and to achieve the level of scale and longevity that our category needs to really win over the long term. So, I think that's the other side of that is as a business leader in that context, that level of education is really important.
Moving on to some of the specific initiatives that Grove is engaging in and that it plans to engage in. So just as a bit of context for those that might have joined us a little bit later, Grove is in the CPG space. You have plastics implicitly, for many people, written into the very nature of your company, yet you are endeavoring to remove all plastic components by 2025, if I'm not mistaken. Can you give us an update on how that's going and what are some of the major challenges that you're engaging with currently?
Yeah, so our category, so for those who don't know just why plastic is bad, a couple of reasons. Number one, like climate change is, I think, probably the most important issue of our time, right? I mean, I'm starting to think that nuclear safety could be up there too. But for most of my life, and God willing, for most of my life to come, I will believe that climate change is the number one issue of our time. And plastic waste is a climate issue, right? For those who don't know, plastic is created from petroleum, and the petrochemicals industry are the folks who actually created the idea of plastic recycling, which is basically bullshit. Less than 10% of plastic gets recycled, and all those little numbers on the bottom, right? Basically everything except for number one is not actually recyclable, but it allows you to feel okay about yourself for using XYZ piece of plastic because you're going to recycle it. No, you're not recycling it. You're just throwing it in the trash and, believing a myth that I, as well as many other people, believed for a long time. Unlike aluminum, for example, which has a super high recycling rate and has 95% energy recapture in recycling, right? So aluminum is almost a perfect closed loop thing, right? It's 95% energy reduction from virgin aluminum to recycled aluminum. So plastic is a particular and uniquely pernicious material. It takes like 1 million years to break down. It's terrible. Anyway, so from our perspective, plastic is the biggest sustainability issue in the industry, right? And about 100% of our industry leverages single-use plastic. So for us, our vision is that consumer products can be a positive force for human and environmental health, not just less bad, but actually more good. And if you want to get there, you have to go through the hardest problem, right? You can't get to a solution from an impact perspective for the industry without solving the hardest problem. So we made that our sort of like number one goal. It also has the benefit from a commercial standpoint of being an extraordinarily well understood consumer problem, right? There's people who don't believe in climate change. It's definitely true. I mean, 88 people on this call right now, like probably maybe some of you don't, right? It's a political issue. Like there's a lot of different sources of information out there. I believe in it, but there's a lot of people who don't. There's almost no one who doesn't believe that single-use plastic exists. There's almost no one who's like, you know what I want? More plastic waste. People want cheaper energy. Like I get that and I understand that argument. There's nobody out there who's like pro plastic waste. You're like, you know what I want? I want the same product, but with a more challenging end of life. Like, nobody wants that. And so we anchored around the plastic issue from a go-to-market perspective because it's one that lines up with both our sustainability goals and also with a message that drives consumer behavior, right? Drives purchase behavior and has helped us, really scale. So, we're well over 100 million in zero plastic sales now. It's the fastest growing part of our business. And it's where a ton of our innovation roadmap goes because we see consumer pull there, right? Consumers genuinely are excited to swap out a plastic heavy product for a zero plastic product in almost every circumstance. And so it's a really great place for us to put a ton of our innovation firepower. And then I guess from a culture perspective, why did we say 2025 and we say it so loudly? The first people who need to believe are not our customers, but our team, right? And so our team understands because I'm saying it to them, I'm saying it to the media, I'm saying it everywhere. Like zero plastic is our wedge, that's our goal, that's where we lead. So if someone's sitting on the R&D side and they're saying, I could work on, lowering the cost of our dish soap enzymes by 10%, or I could work on reducing the plastic in our laundry detergent. But which of those is more exciting? If I've sent a really clear message around the company's strategic priorities, odds are good that we're going to get more innovation aligned with that strategic priority. And I think that's one of the ways we've been able to grow such a consistent and strong R&D pipeline when it comes to zero plastic product.
Nobody wants just more plastic, but people also want lighter, cheaper, and goods that are going to keep their, keep them clean and without leaking. What struggles have you encountered with pushback on alternatives?
Yeah, I wouldn't describe it as pushback. I just think there's a real learning curve, right? I think we take for granted the fact that when you buy a bottle of Dawn dish soap or Tide laundry detergent, you're buying virgin like literally 3,000 or 4,000 of that product, right? They've had several thousand versions to screw up and then replace, and then screw up and then replace, and then, and on and on and on, right? And so when you buy a product from us, you're in like version 5. And so I do look at us as being very early in the learning curve from a product development perspective. And, this bottle, which now has a sort of silicone sleeve, I can tell you, we fielded more than one customer call from someone who'd had it on their countertop, cleaned it, put it down, and then had it slide right off onto the floor and shatter into a billion pieces, right? That's why I put the silicone sleeve on there. And there's a reason it goes a little higher up. So, we fielded a lot of customer complaints, everything from breakage to leakage to, we've been struggling with how we get the dishwasher detergents, because these are wrapped in plant-based PVA, which is like the film around the outside. It's water soluble and totally fine. It's not bad for the environment, anything like that. But it's very sensitive to humidity. And so if any humidity gets in, you don't get a bag full of dishwasher pods. You get one giant dishwasher pod, right? And I'm sure some of you have actually experienced that at some point, right? Where there was like, a little leak in the box under your sink or something, and then you've got like one giant mishmash pod. So we were never able to do that in paper like we wanted, because efficacy always comes first. We can never compromise on efficacy. So we're going to have to move to aluminum for that, so you can get a little bit of an airtight seal. And that stuff has been a challenge, but look, that's the job, right? That's the fun part.
Totally. I want to leave some time for the Q&A for others' questions. But the question I wanted to end my interview on was, all right, so we have lots of students out there right now looking at your example and looking at the example of Grove. What advice would you give to them if they are sincere about a desire to change the world, not despite profit, but through the creation of a profitable high growth business?
Yeah, and I think business is the number one mechanism for change, right? When people ask you your job, they don't say, hey, what is the company at which you work today? No, they say, what do you do, right? Like, we are to a certain extent defined by our careers in a way that's very weird right now. But I would say two things. The first, which both point to the same thing, which is that picking a career that has real purpose, not like sounds good on paper purpose, not like, I don't know, like baloney purpose of like one of these, like an apparel company that's like, we make people feel special or whatever. I think that's like kind of like a baloney purpose. I care a lot more about sustainability. Maybe that's a good purpose. I don't know. I don't mean to belittle anybody's purpose. But one that genuinely has impact against the most important issues of our time. Then I think you sort of can't fail, right? Because I'd say two things. Number one, on the good days and the bad days, right? The good days, everything is easy. On the bad days, and there are bad days at, for-profit, like businesses that only care about money, and bad days on businesses that care about mission and profit. But on the bad days, it's really easy to go home and be like, doing it for the right reasons. Like, even though this sucks, like, I'm glad I tried, right? I did my best and I tried my best. And the second thing, and this is like a little bit of a personal thing, I had a major health issue earlier this year, and it changed my perspective on a lot of this stuff. I had genetic disease, needed a kidney transplant, everything's good. But like, in that process, I was able to reflect pretty deeply on like what actually mattered from my life to that point. And at no point did I care about money at all. Like, at all. I wasn't like, oh, I wish I made more money. I'm happy I made as much as I did. Didn't care, right? I cared about my family, cared about living a life of integrity. And I was like, what is the impact that my time here has had, right? What is my, like, why is the earth different because I was here? And I wanted to feel really good about that. And so, I guess the two pieces of advice I would say are like, work at mission-driven companies. Like, they're out there, find them. And talent is the most important thing that shapes the future of all of these industries, right? Talent is the thing that shapes the future. And yeah, I don't think you'll regret it. I certainly haven't.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to start pulling from questions from the audience. First off, and I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but what role did mentorship play in your journey? And was there a way in which you felt like you might be able to utilize it more effectively if you could go back in time?
I've had amazing mentors through my career. And I've screwed up a lot of those relationships by being too arrogant. Not sort of personally arrogant, but like thinking I knew better than I did, right? And I think I started off by saying that, I was never smarter than, when I was 26, but it's been humbling now, like how many great mentors I've wanted to call up and say, God, you were right. And how did you even put up with my ignorance? And so I wish I'd just been a little more humble, a little less defensive, a little less sure of myself, a little less aggressive, I guess. Yeah, but I've had great mentors throughout my career. And the thing I would say about mentors is don't be afraid to change them, right? Mentorship is it's not a lifetime commitment for you or the mentor. There are periods of time where a single mentor has been incredibly valuable to me, and then I don't talk to them for 2 years. And they're still great friends. They're still, all good, right? But they're not the type of support I need at that time. I also really recommend executive coaching, career coaching, to the extent it's available to you. Like I have a really great coach who I've been working with for half a decade now, and without him, the business doesn't exist. Like he's pushed me to make a bunch of good decisions that I was too scared to make. And there's some of them I think would have been the difference between winning and losing.
Awesome. Just kind of zooming back in time a little bit, from presentation 1 to presentation 175 to investors, how did your message change? Or did it change reliably?
So it didn't change between 1 and 175. And that was bad execution on my part, right? Like keep doing the same thing, expect a different result, definition of insanity. The firm that invested, a firm called Bullpen Capital, their mandate and their thing is they invest in good businesses that are out of favor. And that was at a time when a business like ours was totally out of favor. Sustainability wasn't really a big deal. E-commerce was hated. It was, yeah, I mean, we were lucky to find a firm that focused on ugly ducklings. But one of our Series B investors, I gave him the pitch, and his feedback to me was, you got to just simplify this. You just got to say basically like, you're going to be the sustainable P&G. And, that's not exactly the pitch, but that's not the pitch from there. And it took me 175 pitches to raise the first, whatever, that Series A was $5 million, right? Like the next 500 million based on we're going to be the next P&G pitch. No, that's just like a lot easier. I mean, part of that was our metrics were good, but like part of that was the vision was way clearer, right? Like people didn't understand how we were going to get to scale and disrupt Amazon in these channels, but people could really see how we could build a sustainable brand, right? A durable brand here. And it wasn't about so much the channel as it was about the differentiation, right? If you're a retailer, your differentiation is like price, service, speed, etc. If you're a brand, your differentiation can be product quality, marketing message, soul, whatever, right? And that's always what differentiates us, right? Is our innovation, the soul of the business, what we stand for, and the way that all of that shows up for the customer, right? And that's, I don't know, that's like, I think the thing that matched so much better to that story. Not to mention, just sort of like transparently, and I wasn't thinking like this because I was naive, but these guys who invest are thinking like, okay, what's the, and I say guys deliberately, right? It was all men, unfortunately. They're not thinking about, oh, is this going to work or not work, or can you grow or not grow, whatever. They're thinking about, can I make $1 billion on this investment? And the number of e-commerce businesses that get to that scale is fairly modest, but the number of branded consumer businesses is much bigger. And the multiple of revenue that branded consumer businesses claim is much bigger. And so it was a reposition of the company to a higher multiple category, and more multiple, like I assume folks know, businesses are valued on multiples of sales or multiples of earnings, right? High growth businesses are usually valued on multiple of sales. So changing the positioning of the business to a higher multiple category was a really successful way to reposition it to be more attractive potential capital partners, right? Which is one of the things that, like, what's the relationship between that move and sustainability? Nothing, right? That was just pure like business. And it was correct. And ultimately it's also helped drive our strategy. And now today the brand actually is, we actually are an omni-channel brand, right? And so, we haven't realized the vision, but it turned out the thing that helped me raise the capital was actually the right business strategy, for the next 5 years anyway. So the venture capitalists were probably right. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you've indicated, at least I think you have, that finding employees who are interested in working for Grove is not a struggle.
No, we're lucky to have a great talent pipeline.
Yeah. So then on the flip side, how do you choose among the candidates that you do have? What qualities, and this comes from a question from the audience, what qualities do you hone in on to ensure that they are an optimum fit and of utility to your unique mission?
So I would say two things. The first is, I believe that on soft skill based things, and for what it's worth, this goes for pitching and selling as much as it does for interviewing. Everyone has his or her or their own style, and you lean into it, right? Like, I have my own style. My own style is mine, right? Your own style is yours, and Nancy's own style is Nancy's, right? That's okay. So I would say, don't be afraid to use your own style. For me, my style is, I think, three things. Number one, do I feel like this person is showing up authentically and vulnerably, right? I don't want someone, we're going to hire a CFO candidate soon, and we were having dinner, and he just got a divorce, and he's talking to me about, some like personal stuff. I don't want to say what it is. At some point, you might be able to figure out who this person is, but like, was really showing me like what matters. Some of the stuff he said was like kind of embarrassing, right? But he was clearly showing me his heart, right? And that's the kind of relationship I want to have with my companies, where there's no politics, there's no, you want to go on vacation with your kids, tell me you're going on vacation with your kids. That's fine, right? A product didn't launch, it failed, that's fine. Just tell me, right? We're all going to show up as who we are. So that's number one. Number two, I hire for past success, right? People who have a history of being successful probably have a future of being successful. It's like, it's a little bit of a cheap thing, but I am more likely to hire people who have a track record of getting promoted, success in, yeah, Nancy, exactly. People who are their authentic self always, in my opinion, do better. Unless you're like, a sociopath or a total jerk, in which case you get some counseling and then be your authentic self. But like, yeah, so I look for a track record of success. And then the third thing I do is I create a story in my head about the candidate, right? Where are they from, right? So if I were to be meeting Alex, I would say, Alex, talking about where you grew up, where'd you go to school, how do you pick your career path, why do you make X and Y and Z move? And I'd create a story in my head about a version of Alex that I'd be super excited to work with. And then I'd see if that story sort of checked out, right? I'd be like, oh, cool. He grew up in whatever, I don't know where you grew up, but like, in Portland, Oregon on a farm. Oh, I get why someone who grew up on a farm cared about sustainability, went to a good college, started to understand the impact, wanted to do more research on it. I'd be like, oh, cool. And, hopefully along the way, I'd pick something up that talked about his work ethic. And I'd be like, oh, I can like kind of picture what this guy is like, and the facts support it. And that's been my most consistent sort of hiring methodologies. Is this a guy, a human who I'd like to work with? And do the facts about his or her or their life, support the version of this human that I'd like to work with? And if it's, I interviewed another person recently, and I really, really liked this person. But the facts when I did my references led me to think that perhaps the story I wanted to believe about this person's background was not quite true, right? There were some references that when the going got tough, this person didn't get going. Like, this person started to sort of like vibrate and not really be a good partner and wasn't totally honest. And I was like, oh, I actually can see that now, right? And that's a different story about a different person that I probably don't want to work with. And so we let that person, drop from the process. Anyway, I don't know if that was a good synopsis.
No, that's great.
I had is a really clear process, but
practical as well to make it personal as opposed to just principles. Good, great. We have another question, so I'll read it in its entirety. Have you thought about being acquired by a strategic? If, for example, P&G were to offer you to be acquired at a high multiple, how would you go about doing that, or what would be your decision?
Yeah, I will give a canned answer on this one, which is I am both a missionary and a fiduciary. Right? I care deeply about the mission and I want this to go forever. And, I'm not actively looking to sell, but I also have an obligation to my shareholders, and, that very much includes considering acquisition. So we've had some of those dialogues in the past, but ultimately, it's always been, I think, the right decision for both parties for growth to stay independent. Doesn't mean it can't happen in the future, but, I enjoy the missionary part of my job more than the fiduciary part of it.
Grove has made many changes to its products, and some of them have been incremental and some of them have been quite dramatic. Like, how do you make the distinction between what might be greenwashing? And of course, greenwashing is endemic, especially in the sector, and legitimate change. Like, what's your touchstone as to make that distinction? Yeah,
it's interesting. We don't do sustainability oriented things for marketing purposes, right? I think it's easy to assume that a sustainability driven company does it because you want to talk to your consumers about it. We do it because that's the kind of company we want to be, and we think that's the right thing, and that's what creates, a great brand is a brand that does what you think it would do when no one is looking, and that shows up in all sorts of little teeny tiny ways, right? First and foremost, probably the way the people who create the brand story actually, how much do they love the brand? Like, the number one thing that will make a brand great is if the person who is like writing the email copy is like, I love this brand, right? And then just somehow they write better copy about it because they love it, right? Like, you write a better love note to your wife than to someone that's her husband or partner or spouse, sorry, my wife, right? Like, then I would write to, I don't know, anyone else, because like that's authentic to me. And so we think about sustainability and deep sustainability innovation as being for sustainability's sake, not for marketing's sake. And and then the marketing team uses the stuff that sells. Like, if you look at the front of this zero plastic laundry detergent, which by the way is the most efficacious zero waste product in the market by a lot, it does not say zero plastic. It does not say sustainable. It does not say good for the environment, carbon friendly, carbon offset. No, it says more powerful stain removal. Because like, what do consumers care about? More powerful stain removal, right? The Grove brand stands for sustainability, so people can see it without, people who are looking for it can see it. But, that's how I think about greenwashing, right? Is people who, are trying to build a brand around, trying to come up with green claims to sell product, are probably going to come up with some baloney green claims. For us, we do it because we care about the actual impact. And so if you're doing it and it doesn't show up in any of your marketing, the incentive to make fake progress is zero.
Awesome. I think that's a great marketing-centric encapsulation of a lot of what you've spoken about today. So, Stu, I wanted to thank you very, very much for your time. Really appreciate the candid dialogue. I think that the entrepreneurs that we've had the fortune of having come before us, it's been a beautiful evolution, and I think you represent a new stage in that evolution where entrepreneurs are holding themselves to a higher and higher standard. So thank you very much.
You are kind, Stan. It's wonderful to know you all. Thank you for having me. I hope you all go into mission-driven careers, and I hope you all download the Grove app and become customers. But wonderful to spend time with all of you. Thank you for the kind words. This has been super fun.
Thanks everyone who are attending, and thanks again, Stu.
You're welcome.